Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first in this year's series of Conversations on Glass by Apice, which are taking place this year as part of the Italian Glass Weeks, which is an international festival dedicated to glass, taking place here in Italy, especially for the 2022 United Nations International Year of Glass. The first week of the festival has just happened in Milan from the 10th to the 18th of September, dedicated mainly to industrial glass. And here in Venice, we're just kicking off our week, which runs until the 25th of September, dedicated to artistic glass. My name is Camilla Purdon, and I work as the coordinator of the Venice Week of the festival, which is organized by a committee made up of 5 organizations and institutions here in Venice with particular expertise in glass, including l'Estanza del Vetro at the Fondazione Giorgio Cini, with the Fondazione Musei Civici di Venezia, the Istituto Veneto di Scienze e Lettere d'Arti, the Consorzio Promo Vetro di Murano, and the Comune di Venezia. This year, we are presenting a series of daily online panel discussions called Conversations on Glass by Apice, which is a leading transportation company for works of art with special expertise in the transportation of glass works. And these conversations will be covering a wide range of topics relating to the field of glass with international experts from around the world, as well as Italy, with the aim of providing a platform for discussion and reflection on different aspects relating to glass. Today's topic, which is the first one that we're starting with, is a particularly strong and interesting note to start the series on. It's titled Glass Between Craft, Design and Art. And we are really thrilled that the conversation will be moderated by Emma Park, who's with us today in England. Emma is a freelance writer and contributing editor of Glass Quarterly, who completed her DPhil in classics at Oxford in 2012, worked previously as a lecturer and teacher and a lawyer before switching to journalism. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the wonderful articles that she's written over the last years. Since 1918, she's been, 2018, she's been writing articles on glass and other forms for Apollo, for the Design Edit, for Crafts magazine, Neues Glass, as well as Glass Quarterly, where she is the contributing editor. So we are delighted to have Emma with us today. Just so you all know, today during this conversation, which is being streamed live on the YouTube channel of the Venice Glass Week, we're streaming live, and we're very happy to receive any questions that you might have that you'd like to put to any of our speakers. So if you do have a question that you'd like Emma to ask a speaker at the end of this session, please do add it to the chat function, and she will direct the question to whichever speaker you'd like to ask at the end of the chat. But before I do hand over to Emma, and she will give an overview of our conversation and introduce our brilliant speakers today, I'd just like to introduce Melania Granzo, who's an exhibition manager at Apice, our sponsor, just to say a few words. So Melania, over to you.
Thank you, Camilla, and good evening to everybody. Very happy to be here, and very happy for Apice even this year to support these conversations on glass. I do think that it is important to focus on glass, and especially to focus on Murano. You know that this year all Europe is facing a really important energy crisis. And this energy crisis is creating serious problem in furnaces. It is even most likely that some furnaces has to close, to shut down. So it's really, really important to speak about glass, the importance of this glass city, we can say, where all masters of glass came from there, and where a lot of artists goes to Murano to still follow the blowing of glass. Then I think that this first conversation is really interesting because the 3 words which made up the title of these conversations depicts Italy, it's a bit of patriotism on my side, because craft is important. Italian economy is still based on the craftsmanship, on artisans. And then design, well, Italian design is well known all over the world. And art, well, when we speak of art, we think of Italy. So it's perfect, I think, a perfect title. And let me say that Apice, doing his work, transportation of art, services for art, and with its own carpentry, we are building crates, and most of the time we're trying to build crates according to the client's requests. So to the typical piece of art we have to transport, we can say that even design is a part of our job. So perfect start, I think, a perfect first conversation on glass. Very happy to be here, very happy to support, and I'm looking forward to listen to this conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Melania. So yes, Emma, I will hand over to you now to introduce our brilliant panel and to kick off the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Camilla, and thank you very much for having me here. The word art is derived from the Latin ars, which means a craft or technical skill. The Greeks and Romans made a strong distinction between craft or technique on the one hand, and inspiration or ingenium, which was either innate or given by the gods. Over the 2 millennia since then, visual artists and sculptors have gone from being considered as artisans working with their hands and of a relatively low social status to celebrities or gurus practicing a sort of mystical religion, you might almost say. The term art itself seems to have curiously shifted from denoting something practical and rule-bound to something so abstract that artists are no longer required to make their own work with their hands. Indeed, the term fabricator is commonly used to denote the person who actually makes the work designed or conceptualized by the artist. The prestige, however, along with the representation in the fine art world, tends to remain with the artist rather than the so-called fabricator. Where does this leave the practice of glassmaking? How far has it managed to cross the line between being perceived as a craft or a material for design and being seen as a form of fine art or a material for fine art? Is the future of glass with fine artists from the world of art school who bring their designs along to be made by glass fabricators or craftsmen? Or can someone who makes their own glass art be accepted into the world of fine art on their own terms? With me to explore these issues are 4 speakers with different perspectives and different relations to glass. Susie Silbert is the curator of post-war and contemporary glass at the Corning Museum of Glass. Her curatorial practice is expansive, seeking to broaden the definitions of what glass is and what it can be. As part of her role at Corning, Susie serves as the editor of New Glass Review, the annual exhibition in print. Her international survey exhibition, New Glass Now, which was designed to introduce new audiences and new approaches to glass, made its debut in Corning in 2019. Yep, and it's a really interesting New Glass review. I strongly recommend it. And New Glass Now has since traveled to the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum and to the Toyama Museum of Glass in Japan. Hi there, Susie. And now we have Philip Baldwin and Monica Gergisberg, who should be known to most people who know anything about the contemporary glass world. They've been working as a couple in art and life since 1980. Philip grew up in the US, while Monica is half Italian and grew up in Switzerland. They met in Sweden while training at the Orrefors Glass School and have since lived and worked together in Switzerland, the US, Paris, and rural Wales, where they moved in 2015. For the first 2 decades of their career, they undertook design commissions for companies including Vanini and Nestle. From the late 1990s, they became interested in glass as a medium for sculpture. They have developed an aesthetic of pure vessel-like forms made in blown glass and then cold worked using a technique inspired by Milanese Baciuto. And finally, Benjamin Wright. Hi there, Ben. He's artistic director of Pilchuck Glass School in Washington State. After studying evolutionary biology at Dartmouth College, he trained in glass at the Appalachian Center for Crafts and gained an MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design. While at Dartmouth, he explored forests from upstate New Hampshire to tropical Jamaica to record and map songbirds. His background in biology figures strongly in his artwork, which delves into the evolving relationship between humans and their environment. Through work ranging from interactive visual installations to sonic landscapes, he engages all of his viewers' senses and often bridges the gap between art and science. Very interesting. Well, thank you all very much for being here. Well, we'll start with a sort of conceptual question, a definitional question, if you like. How far would you distinguish between fine art, craft, and design? And can glass be a fine art? Can it be a medium or a material for fine art? So, Susie, as a curator, can we start with you? Where are we now in terms of these distinctions?
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and thank you for having me on this panel. I would say we're everywhere. I mean, glass is everywhere, and I'm not good at the distinctions ones, you guys. I'm not good at boundaries. I believe that the boundaries are all permeable and that the conversations are richer because glass as a material can't really be anywhere that the people don't take it. So artists, designers, and craftspeople take it many places. And just to kind of quickly give y'all a background on what I have in my head when I'm thinking about this, can I take you through 3 images? I've been asked to put together a couple of images. So 3 images. I'll just tell you about them quickly. And then all the times I'm talking, you can think about these. There you go. So 3 works that I have been thinking about a lot in the past year, all using broken mirror. First, by Shari Deans, an American who was born in Hungary, who made her life all over the world before she came to the US in 1939, working with broken mirror amongst many other materials. An artist that believes in the hand, but also works conceptually. Jasper Johns, the painter, said that there is no artist that had more influence on her career than Shari Deans. So that's one. Next slide, please. The incredible Persian artist Monir Farman Farmayan, also working with broken mirror, also living in diaspora from Iran in the United States and then back again. So Shari Deans worked with her hands. She made the work herself. Monir Farman Farmayan worked with artisans and manufacturers in Iran to make these pieces, but was intimately engaged in the work. And the next image. And this piece, hot off the presses, a forthcoming piece by the Indian artist Anjali Srinivasan, who is also based in the US now, also working with broken mirror that she made herself, embedded on a silicone skin. And this piece breathes. So, and she comes out of a more glassy background, trained at RISD like Ben and at Alfred in upstate New York. So I think you see in each of these pieces work that you can cut away to me if you want to. Work that is all using glass in a similar way, broken glass mirror, but is using it in different contexts and conversations. So I guess for me, glass goes where people go. And people that operate in fine art contexts bring glass into fine art contexts. People that operate in craft contexts bring glass there, and so on with design. And that there's permeations between all 3.
Yeah. Thank you, Susie. That's really interesting. Especially the idea of the mirror, the cracked glass, almost like the mosaic effect, using the sort of small pieces of glass as a sort of a base, to build things up. We can maybe talk about that a bit more later. Monica and Philip, your own career started in design and moved in the direction of art. How did this change happen, and what did this mean for you in terms of your own practice and the way you thought about what you were doing?
Here you start.
Well, just as a backdrop, it's all right if it doesn't.
Sorry, we missed you. We missed what you were saying.
I think, first of all, I thought Susie's remarks were superb, and I feel like a country bumpkin following up on that very coherent assessment that she just gave. In our case, we're both, we have the privilege from our perspective of having started out in a very simple place, a very craftsmanship-oriented place, evolving bit by bit into design, and I think finally in the last 20 years, very much more centered on sculptural work. And these things, from our point of view, they're organic. They're also a little bit like dominoes. So you push one domino and the next one goes, and then the next one goes. Can you hear me all right? Okay. Yes, okay. And these things evolve. If I really had my way, I'd say I wish these questions wouldn't come up. We don't see a distinction between art and design and craft particularly. Our work tends to involve all three of these things, and we're proud of all of those elements. At the same time, it's true that we very much like to consider ourselves as working in fine art. And in some respects, especially given that we're based primarily in blown glass, this is often a little bit of a handicap in that perception. If you look at this piece right here, it's done, all of the work is blown in a factory in
Switzerland.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was flown in Switzerland, and so we didn't do those. And we used glass because they made the most sense to express what we wanted to do. It's called the Boat of Remembrance, and it was in Canterbury Cathedral. I mean, there are 100 amphors of each a meter long, tall, and it's the whole thing is 20 meters. So that's quite a far away from when we met in Orifors, and Philip wanted to blown wine glass, and I'm interested in design mainly. And, you know, it was an evolution, as Philip says. You evolve and you're curious about the world and you expand. And today we also work in other materials, not just glass, but, you know, we add them on and evolve them.
I think I would just reiterate, and this work captures this perfectly, the manner in which craft, design, and fine art come together. I don't think I've ever met an artist who wasn't interested in craft and the way in which things are made. Okay, I think that's good.
Oh. Thank you. Was that the answer? You finished?
I'm sorry. I thought
I didn't think we should
we
carried away.
There's two of us, and we don't want to take too much of everybody's time.
Great, thanks, Philip. Well, that's interesting. You said that there's this sort of continuity. At the same time, I noticed you did say, you know, craft is about how things are made, and so perhaps that's something which perhaps differentiates craft a little bit from art. Perhaps the craft's more of the thinking about the how. Maybe art is a bit more of the why, perhaps, something like that. Who knows? But Ben, we're using all these terms. But for you, what is art anyway? I mean, why do we even bother using this term art, which could mean anything really?
Well, that's a very small question. But maybe we can look at, while I try and tackle that, we can look at the image of Red Groom's Ruckus Manhattan. You know, I think I would first say, in terms of, I'll answer the question by not answering the question, because what is art is really defined for me by the maker or the author of whatever it is that we're looking at. I think whenever you're trying to apply sort of binary solutions or definitions to something that's really a spectrum of activity or gender or anything, you're going to run into problematics. And that, as Susie said, you just have all these things that transgress any boundaries you try and apply to this work, whether it's material, you know, or a particular author, or you know, a particular way of working with materials. This image is perfect. If you ask what I look for in art as a curator and what I'm increasingly interested in art, it really goes back to one of my very first art experiences, which was this piece by Red Grooms, that is an immersive installation. You walk through this subway car with these life-size creatures, I would say, although they're all humans, but they're really kind of creatures. And it has a soundtrack, and you know, but in terms of when I say art being immersive, it doesn't necessarily have to be literally immersive, but it sort of changes your state of being by your experience with it. So that's what I look for in art. I want to have an experience that sort of shifts my state of being, the way I think about something, the way I feel about something. I would say that craft is equally capable of doing that. You know, your engagement with a very well-crafted utilitarian object can, it may be in a much more subtle way, change the way you understand your world, or you experience your world. So I don't really understand the things as a binary, but I do tend to put the authority in whoever is the author of that artwork or that piece of craft to define that for themselves. I think, you know, Philip and Monica are a perfect example of a career where they have pursued both intentions, and they're very clear about what they're doing when they're doing it. And then I think you look at the results, and it's also a very clearly different intention. But I think there's all kinds of people who go back and forth throughout their career and operate in much fuzzier way. And I would say just look to the artists or craftspeople to define what they make and what their intention is.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Yeah, so that would be one approach. The sort of the person who makes it gets to decide. But you might wonder, well, is there any merit in sort of having some sort of approximate categories, even if they're only sort of general? Maybe not. Who knows? But one thing is certainly clear, which is that, well, I would say anyway, perhaps not. There is, you might say, a sort of fine art world. There is a world of magazines, there is a world of galleries, there is a world of museums, there's a world of exhibitions. For example, take the Venice Art Biennale. You've got the Art Biennale on the one hand, you've got the Venice Glass Week on the other hand. Now, those are two distinct things. Why are some pieces in the Art Biennale and why are others in the Venice Glass Week? Who decides and why? Is it purely a matter of what the artist decides, or is it also a matter of what the art people decide? Oh, well, Susie has got a book there, so perhaps you can mention that when we come on to your second answer. And of course, there are a couple of overlaps, including I'm going to pronounce his name all wrong, but Roni Plazel. Camilla, perhaps you can pronounce his name better. But anyway, perhaps we could pull up his work very quickly on the screen, if you would. Can you make it full screen? Yeah, thank you. And what's interesting about this, gli alberi crescono dal cielo, trees grow from the sky, is that this is a work of glass art made by someone who has a background in making glass, but it's both in the Venice Glass Week and in the Venice Art Biennale. So it's a nice sort of crossover point, which suggests there is some overlap, but how much is another question. And why does it matter? Well, does it matter? Doesn't it matter? Let's find out. So my second question is, thanks, Camilla. You can take that slide down. My second question is, how far in your experience, for all of the panel, is glass excluded from the fine art world, however you want to define this? How far is it succeeding in breaking through the barrier, if there is a barrier? And does the situation vary from country to country? So, Ben, you're the skeptic, you're the non-believer. How about in your own case? How much is glass art in general, art made in glass, art made by people who make their own glass, let's say, within its own bubble? And how far is there a crossover with art made in other materials and with other techniques, say painting, say bronze casting, I don't know, video art, all that sort of thing. What sort of galleries and exhibitions have you participated in? How much of it was multimedia? How much of it was a crossover? How much of it was purely glass?
Okay, well, I guess we could pull up the images of my work while I speak, but I think there's a lot of different questions built into that question you asked. How has glass transgressed boundaries of art world and craft world? But then you sort of mediated that question by asking how does work made by people who make their own glass? And I think that those are sort of contradictory questions, and that I think glass is very present in the art world, but largely not by people that make their own glass. So in terms of my own exhibitions, I've found that, obviously this work, well, maybe not obviously, but if you look carefully, there's glass throughout. Some of it is handcrafted, some of it is found, some of it is salvaged from a dumpster. The same with the neon and the other elements. So in my own work, I don't really put any hierarchy into how I encounter the materials. It's just how useful they are for expressing whatever it is that I want to express. I would say that for this type of installation artwork, this is in Method Gallery in Seattle, which is a fantastic space that's really dedicated itself to installation artwork. There's another image of a exhibition I did in Poland at the BWA Seek Gallery. This is the same one at Method, but which is another space that is dedicated to glass and ceramics. It's a city-run gallery, but it's taken a very expansive view on on the types of expression. The curator there, Mika Drozdowska, runs an incredibly inventive curatorial program out of that starting point of offering ceramic and glass arts. So I again think that there's a spectrum of activity. I do see glass everywhere. We have an artist in residency program here at Pilchuck that expressly brings, I guess, what you would say fine artists, people without a direct experience in glass, and offers them an experience that's mediated by a lot of fabrication expertise so that they're able to express themselves in glass. And I see the spin-off effects of that and other residency programs, Urban Glass and others. I think there's a lot of people that you would be very stretched to call them glass artists, but who are making incredibly interesting work using the material of glass right now in the fine arts world.
Thank you, Ben. Just a very quick follow-up. You said there was a sort of contradiction between people who have glass in fine art settings and people who make glass. What was that the point you were trying to get at there? Sorry, just to tease that out a bit.
Well, I think maybe Philip and Monica might be an exception in this, but that largely people who are brought up in the glass world, I still think that there are obstacles to them presenting their work and having their work understood in the fine art context.
And what would you say those obstacles are?
Perception, attention, the fact that there was a whole sort of niche exhibition, and there was sort of a niche created for glass art. So in a lot of ways, particularly in the commercial gallery section. So work that looks like the work that's in there has, I think, had been challenged to be imagined in a different way. That being said, the work I make looks nothing like the work that you would have found traditionally in those galleries. So I've never encountered any confusion about what my work is or what my intention is. That being said, I'm very much culturally a glass artist. I got all my training in the glass world. I built most of my career in the glass world. So I think sometimes that is an obstacle to being understood in a different way, just where you sort of come from, but artistically, I mean.
Great. Thanks very much, Ben. Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. Right. Monica and Philip, for you, in your case, you've worked in lots of different countries on both sides of the Atlantic. Is there a difference between the way in which glass art, I don't know, glass art made by glass artists, people who make their own work, or art made in glass, is there a difference between the way in which this is viewed in different countries? What would you say?
Well, I would say that, especially in the US, the glass art is more dynamic, and it's a younger art. So it's more present, it's more visible. Whereas in Europe, there are different, in Czechoslovakia, I mean, the glass expression is different than in Italy or in France or the UK. And I think it's much more visible in the US generally than in Europe. But it's all coming along and it's growing. And just to get back what Ben said, when somebody comes from a fine arts background and uses glass as a material, nobody questions it. Nobody says it's a glass artist. It's just art. And I think when as Ben says, if you start with the glass as a material because maybe you fall in love with it or whatever, and that becomes your language for its expression, it's more difficult to go through the barrier. That's, yeah.
Thank you, Monica. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that starting off in glass puts you at a disadvantage to people who start off in fine art?
Well, personally, it's not a disadvantage, but you find it's a disadvantage when you like to show it in a fine arts gallery. I mean, now we actually were showing this a gallery at a fair, and we had the Picasso next to us, which was lovely. It was rather flattering, but we didn't sell anything. So, but it was fun. It was fun, and it's a process. It's evolving. And I think it's people, as Susie said, the boundaries are permeable, and they will, they fluctuate.
But you would say that just sorry, Philip, carry on.
No, I let Philip go down.
I was just going to add. I think obviously it's true what Monica was implying, that Europe does have a longer, deeper tradition as concerns glass, and it's rooted in especially in the last 300, 200 years in manufacturing and in the as part of the Industrial Revolution, even though the hand making aspect of it was very much prominent until the 20th century. And it's to us living in rural Wales, it's quite obvious, some of these things, and it's certainly obvious to us that America is making this transition much more easily than some other countries. And just one other point, if you start a career making wine glasses, needless to say, the journey is going to be a little longer before you get to making something like in this picture, the People's Wall, which we originally made for Canterbury Cathedral, which is basically filled up with detritus from other works, leftover pieces from other works made over the past 10 or 12 years, and which I think, we hope, qualifies as fine art. But even there, you can see within it this tradition of hand making and in blown glass. I'm not sure I've expressed that very coherently, but anyway.
I mean, so thank you, Philip and Monica. Would you say, therefore, that, education is important? Does one have to be educated at art college in order to become a fine artist?
I'm not sure if that was a pointed question, but I have a degree.
Not at all, not at all.
I have a degree in political science from American University, which I got in the 1960s. And then I worked in experiential education, Outward Bound, and similar programs for the next 10 years, and then decided to be a glassblower. And it went from there.
You have to say a lot of historical aspects and, social commentaries are basically also, it also dates back to Philip's education partially, our interest in what's going on in the world and try the way we try to express it, and our interest in politics and social issues.
Lovely. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Monica and Philip. Susie, as a curator in the museum sector, do you find that glass is still viewed as a craft or as a sort of design form by fine art galleries and museums? Maybe it's different in the States from in Europe, as Monica and Philip were saying, that the States is probably more advanced in terms of its view of glass as an art form than over on this side of the Atlantic. What do you think? How far has glass become accepted into the museum world and gallery world?
Well, I feel like I echo Ben in many things, but glass, there are plenty of objects made in glass in fine arts museums all throughout the world, just plenty of them, because there are so many artists that are engaged in the culture of contemporary art, fine art, that use the material, that have gone to Pilchuck, gone to Sirva, gone to Barango, gone to other places and use the material. So it's all there. But in terms of work that comes from the communities of glass makers or glass thinkers, well, that is often seen within the framework that it comes from. It makes sense. There's a culture of making that produces the glass work made by glass artists, and it's understood as within that culture. I don't actually think that's necessarily such a bad thing. Sometimes there's the case of, I really do think all of this is cultural, which is why I held up Howard Becker's art world, the sociologist, University of Chicago sociologist. I think that he is, for me, just super instructive about this. And his main idea is that there are many different art worlds and that each of them have their gatekeepers and their galleries and their residencies and their communities. And I think that's useful. It seems to me that there's so many points and such a short amount of time to make them. So here's one. One, I know of many studio glass artists, or at least a couple, American in particular, that only wanted their work to be seen as fine art. So when they had people donate them to the museums, they wouldn't allow them to be donated to the decorative arts or design or applied arts curator. Guess what? Those works don't get shown. And they would be the first candidate for deaccession because the artists themselves wanted to be defined that way, but the fine art curator, contemporary curator, there's no reason that they should understand that work as within the conversation of these other things that they're paying attention to. Where the decorative arts curator or design curator might deeply understand that work and want to use it and be able to put it into an interesting context. So again, for me, I don't really find these distinctions I don't see there's a paradigm of advancement. I don't see that glass should want to be a fine art only. I mean, glass can't want anything. Glass is a material. It's people that want things. So that's one thing. And I guess, sorry, so much. Another thing that I think about when we're having this conversation that's along the same lines, but a different framework, is that especially probably as an American and an American whose family immigrated not that long ago to the country, I think about all of this desire to have glass defined as something else, as an assimilationist narrative. It's okay to want to assimilate. You can want to assimilate. Equally, it's okay not to want to assimilate. When you don't assimilate all the way, you keep some things that are interesting. And this is a frame of reference that is not probably the right context in Venice, but for instance, if all of the Jewish people move and assimilate into all the white people in the United States, that's fine. But where do you get your good pastrami sandwich? I mean, these are the things that I think about all the time. And with that,
Susie, just a follow-up question on that. I mean, that's interesting. Of course, that's certainly one point of view. I mean, what about, is there no sense in which the fine arts stamp is a sort of mark of approval, or mark that you've reached a certain conceptual standard, and viewing something as craft is perhaps, or viewing it as just glass in the glass world is something which hasn't quite reached that intellectual standard that we say hold the highest, the old masters or whatever to, in terms of how we interpret their work?
I think I would say, if you look, it's raining out, so a lightning bolt might come and get me, but I think I say that like if you wanted to, I'm trying not to get totally into territory that I don't want this to be on YouTube. I think I'm thinking no. I mean, it's too much. There's so much highly conceptual work that's made within the glassy community that's only interpretable within the glassy community. And I think it's a stamp, sure, like who doesn't want to make more money, or perhaps you have more audience, but we live in a time of heterogeneous cultures where the notion of trying to only be understood within one contemporary art framework, there isn't even one contemporary art conversation. There are many contemporary art conversations. To me, this is one of them. Do I want to be understood in many different venues? Yes. Do I want the artists that I think are badass and great to be understood in many different venues? Yes. But then it is part of my work, and I think the work of the Corning Museum of Glass, to try to make this intellectually available to other people. Like, we're having a good party. They should want to come to our party also. I don't just want to go to theirs.
Fine. I understand. Thank you, Susie. Thank you very much for those interesting responses. That's quite provocative and quite lots of different things to think about there. So going on to the third question, Let's move to then, having spoken about all these concepts and a bit of philosophical background, glass specifically. Let's get down to the practical side of things. What are the virtues, strengths of glass as a material for art, as a way of if we've been talking a lot about craft is about how one makes things, and the word expression has come up again and again in this conversation. The idea that art is about perhaps expressing something, maybe concepts, maybe ideas, trying to communicate something which is about thought and not just about the way something's made, but the purpose for which it's made, what you're trying to sort of say from the artist to the viewer. So what are the strengths of glass and what are its limitations? Monica and Philip, let's start with you. You use a lot of different hot working and cold working techniques. Could you explain how, given the way you encounter glass, you see its strengths and limitations?
Oh boy. Well, you want me to tackle that? I'd rather pass on this question, but anyway, I guess why do I say that even is because it's a tough one. If you're doing blown glass, you're taking aboard a whole lot of material and technology and so on. That's cost. And costs that is considerably more burdensome than say if I'm going to be a painter and I need a canvas and paint and brushes. So there's a whole technological suitcase that comes along with what you're doing. And that's not just in blown glass, that's in a great deal of what's done in glass. Not everything, because increasingly things are conceptual and thrown together. So you don't need to have all of this baggage in order to blow glass, in order to make work in glass. But in our case, it's a pretty serious trip. And since December, the gas prices have doubled, the electricity prices have tripled. So anyway, that's just background. Meanwhile, the material itself, and I think this probably has something to do with why the making of art in glass is burgeoned in so many other directions, and maybe not as much so in blown glass in contemporary art terms, is because if you're going to do it well, if you're going to do it in a traditionally masterful way, you got to stay at it a good long time. And it's not necessary to be a good glass blower to make good art in glass. Nevertheless, in our case, it came from a particular perspective and an attitude, and 40 years later, we're still learning about how to make the things we make. It's a constant learning curve. We love to compare what we do to tennis players, because even Rafa and Roger and Joko, they go on learning, and we identify with them, and we rather like to identify with that. As far as the material, and why don't I stop there and let Monica continue?
Well, he was very good. He had a good flow there. Anyway, I think it's like glass. I think it's like if you choose a media that fits you, you identify with it. I think that's that's where it comes from. It's like, a painter, he likes paint. Sculpture, he might like stone or marble. We like glass. And I think the fragility of the material, it's quite ambiguous, the material glass, as we all know. It's hot, you can't touch it, it's cold, it's fragile, it breaks, and certain things, the material glass, it's just perfect to express it. So I think that's why we stick with it, and that's why we evolve with it, we hope. And I think that's where it goes. I think there's not really much I can add there.
That's good. Did we address the question? I'm curious.
Yes, I think you did. Thank you.
Oh yeah, just show maybe the last two pictures, because they very much involve what we've just been talking about in blown glass. The boat.
No, the monoliths and the
aquarium. The monoliths and the aquarium. Yeah. Yeah.
Next.
Nice. And then the next one.
Next.
Yeah.
Next.
Not that one. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Those are about a meter 10 tall, a lot of them.
Very unpractical.
Just blown glass.
So I mean, I love this piece because I don't know, there's something so ethereal and sort of pleasing in a sort of strange way about these forms. They seem sort of recognizable, but also alien at the same time. I mean, was there any necessity for them to have been made in glass rather than in another material? And if so, why?
You mean because they're opaque and don't have
I just mean, why did they need to be made in glass? Did they need to be made in glass?
I don't think need is a word we should entertain. We made them in glass because we work in glass, and that's the way we wanted to make them.
Sure. In terms of, just very quickly, and then we'll move on to the next two speakers, but I think we have a bit of time since we don't have any questions so far. By the way, any audience members, if you do have questions, please do put them in for Camilla to pass on. Glass, you say it takes years and years, to become good as a glass artist, and many people say that too. I was talking to Lino Tagliapietra, the master of glass blowing, perhaps in the world, the other day, and he was saying you could take 6 or 7 years and you could become reasonably good, but if you want to become, if you want to be really understand the material, you have to keep learning forever. He said, and I'm sure that. Artists in any material, painting as well, would say the same thing. It's a lifelong process of learning to become really, really good, to really understand the material. I mean, when you look at the way that, say, painting is approached by critics, they very much sort of look right at the details, the finest shades of what's going on in the picture to try and sort of interpret it. Do you think glass has that? Monica and Philip, maybe we'll start with you. I mean, do you think glass has that ability to be subtle and detailed in its expressiveness? Can it have the same level of control as a paintbrush?
I would say so.
Definitely.
I would say so. I mean, it's up to the person who actually does it and wants to express. And then you use the details and the delicatesse and all the, the fine strokes and all of that. Absolutely.
And I would say it's increasingly true as people are constantly getting more and more refinement in their particular approach to the material. And I think it's extraordinary what people are doing today and the subtleties that they are able to make. Great,
thanks, Monica and Philip. Ben, what about you? I mean, would you agree basically with what Monica and Philip were saying in terms of the way that your engagement with your material can sort of and the use of glass particularly can impact, what you do, what you're trying to express? How far do the specific qualities of glass for you influence your artistic approach?
Well, for me, I'm very drawn to many of the different characteristics of glass. I agree with Philip that learning curve is a challenge of the material, and having observed a lot of, as I said, our artists and residents who are new to the material, the ones that seem to thrive have made, whether they've made an investment in learning the material of glass, they have made an investment in learning some material quite deeply, which then allows them a more fluid approach to any material. So I do think that a sort of deep engagement in what I consider craft and understanding the material and its material properties is hugely valuable in approaching this material that does have so many, technical challenges to it. It's a material that at room temperature is sort of a frozen liquid. So that's somewhat unique in our world, and it does present a lot of fabrication challenges. How do I use glass or its materials in my work? I mean, I think another one that Philip sort of touched upon that I think is actually probably the existential challenge of the material or as Susie said, the material has no challenges, but the people working in the material is that it's, requires a lot of energy to work with it in many ways. So it's figuring out ways to be quote unquote sustainable in the way that we use it as artists, or more ethical in the way that we use it as artists, I think is probably the biggest challenge moving forward for the field. It's an economic challenge, but it's also an ethical challenge as artists. So, and I am much more careful with the way I work with the material. I was very experimental throughout much of my youth, and I had that privilege and luxury of using the material as if there wasn't a huge investment of energy to make it available to me. But now I'm much more selective. I'm much more likely to pull something out of the dumpster that's very close to what I want than try and make exactly what I want 10 times. Because for what I'm doing, as long as it gets the idea across, it's not really, the details are maybe a little bit less important to me.
Well, what's the most important thing for you in terms of what you're doing, your artistic practice?
What experience a child has with my artwork is honestly probably the most important thing, followed closely by adults, I guess. Yeah, no, but it is the overall, like, I try and create hypersensory environments. So what the details that they're able to pull out of all of that they're presented with, and what their experience is, hopefully is different for every human who's having that experience is different. So hopefully the work is flexible enough that it allows, anyone to have a meaningful experience and take something away from it.
And you can do that with glass that's maybe recycled to some extent, and you don't need to have perfectly refined glass for that purpose.
Sure. I mean, we can look at that image again if we want of the detail, but I mean, I think in that one sort of detailed image, there's neon that I fabricated. There's neon that was left over from classes here. When I use neon, I'm primarily interested in it as a light source and what that does to the way people perceive things. So, what shape it is might not be that important in a particular sense, but in another sense, I might want it to look like it's dripping off a shelf. So then the shape is very important in particular to create that impression. The same thing with blown glass, or, the many different, there's all kinds of sheet glass throughout. Maybe go to the next slide if you could. Yeah, so there's, I mean, this would be an example. These blown sort of bulbous forms were a very particular form that I was going after, whereas sort of some of the light that you see, the rocket ship was something that somebody had worked incredibly hard on but couldn't afford to take home with them. So I took it and spray painted it gold and glued a bunch of stuff on it, and it was then mine, so I don't know, just to say that again, in my own practice, it's really a spectrum in the of interactions with the material. That big, huge blue jug that's up there was made by an incredible team of fabricators at the Museum of Glass that have skills to work in scales that I'm not able to. So, when that opportunity presents itself, that was made 10 years ago with an uncertain intention and finally found its way into an installation. So I just think there's a lot of different ways. I think maybe my practice represents a spectrum that a lot of people work on, and somewhere on that spectrum, from being super specific to being totally free with the material, right? I just like to do it all in one piece.
Amazing. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, that's so you have a whole variety of things all going on at the same time. Great. Thank you. And Susie, finally. So, I mean, we were talking, I raised this question already of, are the tools of glass making, is glass as a material at a disadvantage compared with other materials? I mean, could you say that, can glass do everything, say that paint can do, or that sculpture and then marble can do, or the traditional fine arts?
Probably, but I have, that's not a very robust answer, but I think the answer is probably, as a person that believes in artists and the creativity of artists and craftspeople and designers to really get at the heart of a material. But I think I'd like to show my last two images to kind of talk through a little bit of that. Because I think for me, one of the things that happens in painting is the thing that happens in any artwork, really, which is that it's also about understanding where things are right now and understanding where they've been historically. And one of the many things that's interesting about actually each of these artists that are using basically the same material, broken mirrored glass, to hang very different ideas on. Monir Farman Farmayan is using the deep history of Ayna Kare, this mirror work in Iran, used to make these incredible mausoleums and other spaces where it's all entirely covered in mirror. She's using the deep history of that and also the deep history of Islamic design to make pieces that, like this one, can move, can be displayed in a number of different ways. It's sort of within a modernist framework, but using this deep history the same way a painter could use a deep history of painting and update it in various ways. And the next slide, please. Similarly, Anjali Srinivasan is using the same idea of these mirrored spaces, except for when they moved from Iran to India, that when the Mughals brought them in the 15th and 16th centuries, and they became these incredible palaces, mirror palaces, as part of these bigger forts. And what Anjali, so both Anjali and Monir thinking about these deep histories, the same way a painter could think about deep histories. But what Anjali takes from it is not this sort of modernist idea, but she is thinking about the hands of the craftsmen that used to make these incredible spaces that no longer exist. And also the impacts and fractures on India that have created the heterogeneous, textured cultural landscape of India today. So the Mughals coming and breaking up Hindustan, the British coming and breaking up in what was India then, the Gujarat earthquakes that got rid of the tribal craftsmen that kept these spaces. So I think in all of these pieces, all by women, including the Sharidins, all working in diaspora, all working with these fragmented mirror that require the viewer to experience them to complete the work. I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, yes, glass, like this is just one part of glass. This is just mirrored glass. And here we get all these different ways of working, all these different ways of relating to history, and all these things that no other material can really do as well, that thinking about reflection and experiential work and the kind of performativity of an object. So if all of that is just in broken mirrored glass, then I say, yes, glass as a material, as a medium, can do all of the things that other media and material can do, plus a whole bunch of its own.
Great, wonderful, Susie. Well, thanks very much for that. Given we're slightly running out of time, I think what we'll do is just very quickly do my very final question, and I'd be grateful if all of you could just sort of answer this very, very quickly, just to give a sort of little summary to the audience, which is, what is the future of art in glass? Ben, can we start with you?
More. I mean, it's, as Susie said, it's gonna, I think it always has been in many, many different realms, from technology to science labs to architecture. And I just think that we will continue to find more interesting ways to use the material. That being said, I do think, with a heavy note of, we will also figure that some of the ways we've used the material just aren't sustainable moving forward.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. So more, but also thinking about ways of using it differently.
New ways to use it, yeah.
New ways to use it, possibly recycled, that sort of thing. Great. Susie, what about you?
Paraphrase the mighty Mos Def and say, when you ask yourself where glass is going, ask yourself, where am I going? Like the glass is going where the people go. And when the people get better, the glass will get better. We just got to follow the makers always.
Great, thank you. Monica and Philip?
Would it be possible?
Yeah.
Would it be possible as an answer to show our slide of the aquarium? It's the very last slide on the list. So. Oh dear. Can you hear us?
Can you show the last slide?
There we go.
There we go.
Here we go.
Voilà. Well, maybe that's where the,
I don't think
the
we
glass
need
is going.
We agree with
All of you.
Susie. There's a lot of positive future, and this is part of that future.
So glass is the archaeological discoveries of the future. Maybe by then they'll have moved on to a different art form with different materials. Who knows?
That's in a museum show that we have just now at a museum in Conches here in France.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I like seeing the goldfish swimming through these vases, but also the idea that they've gone back to the sand from whence they came.
It's an archaeological piece and it's a performance piece.
Lovely, thank you very much. Well, thank you, everyone, for your really, really interesting answers to these difficult and perhaps controversial questions. So, glass between craft, design, and art. Well, how to conclude? It seems that there are lots of different ways in which glass can be art. It seems like it's in a very good state right now, perhaps generally, in terms of both in the US and in Europe. There's lots of creativity, certainly looking at the Venice Glass Week, and also previously having been to the British Glass Biennale in Stourbridge in August. There seems to be a lot of creativity, a lot of new ideas. Some of the pieces we've seen today are also integrating not just glass, but different materials together. So multimedia certainly seems to be a way to go. In terms of the skills of glass making, let's hope they continue so that artists who work primarily in glass can also have that facility to make sculptures out of glass, as well as including them in other materials. Of course, we have the challenges of things like Murano and everywhere where gas prices matter. Again, talking to Lino Talia Pietri, he said, well, what about the problem of that there doesn't seem to be sufficient interest among young people in learning how to blow glass, learning all those technical techniques that are required. But perhaps glass can come about in other ways. Then we've got the challenge of ethical, environmental issues, which Ben mentioned. So perhaps a lot of challenges going forward for glass in the International Year of Glass, but also a lot of appreciation, perhaps, as Susie showed, of the ways in which glass can be used, appreciation of it as a material for art in a way that it wasn't appreciated 100 years ago or even more recently than that. So Camilla, I'll hand back to you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much on behalf of the festival for what really was the most fascinating and enjoyable hour. I feel very lucky to have been able to sit here in Venice listening to all of your really, really interesting perspectives. I realize it's an extremely large topic to have had to try and tackle in really less than an hour, but all of you raised such thought-provoking points. Obviously, Susie is a curator and editor, Ben as artist and artistic director of one of the world's most prestigious glass schools. By the way, Ben, obviously happy 50th anniversary to Piltdown. I know you were celebrating over the weekend, and it's so quite a momentous anniversary. And of course to Philip and Monica, two of the world's most celebrated and pioneering glass artists. So we really have had such a great group, and thank you all very, very much indeed, not least to our wonderful moderator, Emma, who has done a brilliant job at navigating this, again, enormous topic and given us lots to think about. Just to remind everybody who's watching at home, we do have another conversation coming up soon. The next topic as part of the Conversations on Glass series will be on Wednesday, the 21st of September at 11:30 a.m. CET, so Venice time. The topic is 2022 United Nations International Year of Glass. Welcome to the Glass Age. So we will have Alicia Duran, who is the chair of the International Year of Glass, as well as Teresa Medici, who's the chair of the ICOM Glass Group and heavily involved in the IYOG 2022 Initiative 2. Professor John Parker from the University of Sheffield, Department of Materials Science and Engineering, as well as Dino Zandorella Necca and Fabrizio Cattaneo, President and CEO of Vitrum. So it just remains to thank our sponsor Apice, who's been represented by Melania Granzo today. We're
Thank you all. Thank you.
Most grateful to Apice for facilitating conversations such as this, which really have been such a treat and fascinating to think about as we go around the Italian Glass Weeks and beyond. And to everybody who's been watching at home, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed, I'm sure you've enjoyed the conversation today. The good news is that it's been recorded and will be available to watch on YouTube very shortly. So if you weren't able to watch live, if you have others who you think would be interested in following this discussion, they will be able to do so shortly on the Venice Glass Week YouTube So once again, huge thanks to our wonderful speakers, to Susie, Monica, Philip, Ben, and to our moderator, Emma, and see you all hopefully in Venice very, very soon. Good night.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.